We come together today as a family. We're together because we do remember. And more than remembering, we are living the words that are now a mantra in our lives: never again. Many people today have spoken about this, and I appreciate every one of them. I'm going to move on to a time when I was 3 years old. The date was 1937, and I was walking with my mother on the streets of Berlin. Suddenly she stopped. She grabbed my hand so hard, I tell you, I can feel it still. "Don't you move, Sonia," she said, "and don't you dare cry." We had come upon a Hitler rally. The streets were filled with mobs of people hurrying to get into the bleachers so they wouldn't miss the honored speaker, Herr Hitler himself. The shouting, the legions of soldiers shaking their cans and crying out, "Gib, gib, gib to die bitter bösen Nazis." Sardonically, give to the terrible, evil Nazis. I remember my mother put a coin into my hand and had me put into that can. We stayed. We heard the shouting. At last we went home, and that was the very first sign that I remember of what it was like to be a Jew, a 3-year-old Jewish child in Nazi Germany. The next sign came when my nanny, Fräulein Käthe, Miss Kate, we were never allowed to call adults by their first name. Fräulein Käthe took me every morning to the park. My sisters, of course, were in school. My father was at work. He was a designer of coats and suits, ladies' coats, I will describe later. We go to the park where I love to feed the ducks. And on the gate is a large sign: "No dogs allowed," and "No Jews." We lived in a lovely suburb called Charlottenburg, suburb of Berlin. I wonder to this day what would have happened if the good people of Charlottenburg had gone en masse to that park and said, "No, we will not allow this. These are our friends, our citizens." It's what the Danes did when they saved nearly all the Jews in Denmark. And I wrote a book about that, and I met some of the heroes. It's called Room in the Heart. When there is room in the heart, there is room in the home. Unhappily in Germany, there was not enough room in the hearts of the people. And so it continued. The next sign was closer to home. My 12-year-old cousin Leah was still going to school. It was just before the Nuremberg laws, when we were divided and separated from people who were not of our faith, set aside, soon demonized and persecuted, called names, as my young cousin was called. She was sitting in the back of the room. The teacher strode up and grabbed her arm, pulled her to the front and said, "Children, look at this Jewish pig. Nobody should talk to her." The third sign was more horrible. My mother told me about it. It was a song that was being sung. There was a group of young people called brown chirps. They were sort of like scouts, but it was not voluntary. If a family had a young boy, he better belong to the Hitler Youth, the brown shirts. They went to meetings. They were basically taught to hate, and they were taught this song, which they sang as they strode through the streets, arm in arm. "When the blood of Jews spurts from our knives, things will be twice as good as before." I've never forgotten those words. So my mother, a woman of valor, saw the signs. She was very adamant, she was feisty, she was street smart, and she saw the signs and she heeded them. What to do? She had to make a plan to get us out. This was not the norm. Most of the people in Germany at that time and in the world today say, oh, it's all going to blow over. We're not responsible. It's up to the government to do something. Hitler is a crazy man, they said. They forgot one very important thing. Hitler was elected. He was there by the consent of the governed. Imagine. And he foretold exactly what he was going to do. And when I speak to young people all over, I say to them, if you hear someone say they are going to do something, believe it. This goes for your own world today. If there is a bully in school, someone who's going to light a match, someone who's going to bring a gun, they'll tell you, what are you going to do? Are you going to respond? Are you going to tell someone about it? Or are you going to withdraw, hope for the best, keep silent? That, of course, was the big problem of my generation when I was a child, the silence of the majority. My mother was not silent. She went to work immediately making a plan. No, she made 2 plans to get us out, away from the Nazis. Well, my father, as I told you, was a designer of coats and suits, and he belonged to an organization. And Mother saw the trade paper on in our house, and she saw that they were having a conference in Cuba 2 weeks hence. She went to my father, sat him down. Max, she said, I want you to go to this conference in Cuba. Take some of your designs. Of course, he was always sketching, show what you can do a little business there. Don't come back. Well, he was, of course, astonished. What are you telling me? Don't come back? You're going to be here in Germany with 3 children, the youngest 3 years old, 10 and 13. How are you going to take care of them? Don't worry. We'll find a way. You go to America. How do I get to America? I don't know. A way will be found, she said. You have to go. We knew that they were picking up Jewish men in our very neighborhood. The Gestapo coming to the door in the night. Is Mr. Miller here? Send him out. If he's in bed, they went into the room and they dragged him out. Why? Who knew? He had said something, written something against the regime. His name was on some list. Maybe a neighbor had reported him. And Mr. Miller disappeared. We didn't know exactly where, but there was suspicions. I have to tell you, they knew. How often we heard we didn't know. They knew. As the time went on, everybody had to know. They had to see the trains going by, the trains that had transported cattle, now transporting people. Later, they had to see the smoke in the air, and they had to smell the smell of flesh, human flesh. In 1932, there was a mission sent from America to Germany, including the great ambassador, Claire Bouthelus, and they came back, 10 people with essays describing what was going on and defining what Hitler said he would do. He will exterminate the Jews, not only from Germany, but from all of Europe. Listen to that word, exterminate. How do we use it today? We exterminate bugs. We exterminate rats. Hitler used the word very knowingly, because once he could use that word and it would come into the public consciousness, it really didn't matter all so much. No, we could remain silent. So my father left. My mother and we 3 girls were left in Berlin. And certainly, after time, my mother realized she had to get out. Things were getting worse and worse. You have heard the history, how they smashed the windows of stores where Jews owned the stores, how they were forcing Jewish rabbis with their beards to bend down and clean the streets of the glass that they had put there, how the synagogues were burned, including our own synagogue on Fasanenstrasse, where my parents were married, where my grandfather still walked the boulevard every Saturday to attend services. The synagogue was set on fire. Call the police. Call the fire department. Yes, of course they were called. And what did they do? They stood and watched it burn down. So with all of the synagogues throughout Germany. It was too late. My mother knew we had to leave, how to go, what to say. Well, God works in mysterious ways. I was very sick. I had whooping cough. I always assure children that I meet with today, it's not going to happen to you. You're vaccinated when you're a baby. It's a terrible disease of the lungs. My mother took me with her when she went to the Nazi headquarters to make application for us to leave Germany. Made a long application, wanted to go to Switzerland. Of course, we waited as people do. We're finally shown into the room. Sit down, don't you dare cry. I'm sitting. And the official takes out the application and he says, why do you want to leave the fatherland? Well, his child here is very sick. She has whooping cough. And the doctors tell me that if I can get her to Zurich, to the high mountains, she may recover. In those days, it was believed that the Alps had the power to infuse the lungs with healing, and sanatoriums were built there. And so the Nazi understood that, but he said, look, you are saying here you want to take 3 children. What about the 2 other girls? They're much older. Can't you leave them here and take this baby with you? Oh, no way. I have no one to leave her with. My mother is 75 years old, and the girls, well, they're teenagers. They need a mother's firm hand. He looked a little suspicious. Finally, he stamped the visa. Of course, it said Jude, so anyone who would ask for our papers would immediately identify us. He said, all right, you can go. You can go to Switzerland for 1 week. You can take what each of you can carry in one hand, and 10 marks per person, like $10. My mother thanked him. She took the visa. She went immediately to her mother's house, Grandmother Lucy. Grandmother Lucy sat there and listened to my mother. Mama, come with us, come. It's so dangerous here. You see what's happening. We're going to America. You know Max is already gone. We'll take care of you. I will get your name on the visa, but you have to leave with us. My grandmother drew herself up and she knocked her cane on the floor and she said, you are crazy. You're a troublemaker. This will blow over. And you and your 3 little children are going to be in a strange land. No family, no money, nobody to help you. You're dragging them all over the world, and by then, everything here will be fine. Don't come to me again with this crazy plan. I'm German. We've lived here for centuries. My goodness, the Kaiser's doctor was a Jew. It's going to be fine. Fast forward 2 years later, we received a letter from the Red Cross. Grandmother was taken from that apartment where my mother stood begging her to leave. She was dragged to the railway station. She was taken to Auschwitz. And because she was in frail health and old age, she was sent to the left. And we now know that that meant the showers. And after the showers, that meant the gas chambers. And so this was my mother's grief her whole life long, because she was never able to save her mother. But we got out. My mother walked out of that apartment one day, closed the door behind her, leaving everything except for the luggage that we could carry, a few mementos. She wore this necklace, and we got on the train to go to Zurich. Zurich, being neutral, was allowing people to travel through on their way out, away from the Nazis, away from potential war, away from extermination. Well, I can only imagine how Mother felt when she sat in that train with her 3 girls beside her, free at last. But no, the train stopped suddenly, not a disclosed stop, an unusual stop, and everybody grumbled, why are we stopping? What's going on? Well, we soon found out because the door was flung open, and a Nazi in uniform jumped onto the train and shouted, "Jews out!" Nobody moved. Mother looked at us. Again, he screamed, "Jews out! Come, girls, we have to go." We were the only ones in the compartment in the train. And we were taken out to a hut. I remember that it was very cold. It's already winter time. And my mother and my 2 older sisters were strip searched. They only felt through my clothes, and they took my little teddy bear, the only toy I had, even felt that. Finally, the matron let us back. These people have nothing. The train went on. We ended up in Zurich. It was nighttime. Mother had rented one small room for us, 2 beds, a bed for her, a bed for my sisters. I slept on the couch. All right, we were safe. We had a little money. Maybe we'll get out pretty soon. Father will send for us. That was the plan. Well, we ended up in Zurich for a whole year. How to survive? Well, my mother, typical of her, had a career. Most women those days did not. My father didn't want her to have a career. She wanted to be a baby nurse. So she went to work for a neighbor, doing his bookkeeping, earned enough money for her tuition, and became a registered baby nurse. So she figured that once we were in Zurich, she would go to work. No, it was not to be. We were not citizens in that country, so she was not allowed to work. My sisters couldn't go to school. We were not citizens, just passing through. So what did we do? We left the little room, we walked the streets. I remember walking on the streets between my 2 sisters. They had learned an English word or 2. One of the words was money, and they used to sing, M-O-N-E, M-O-N-E-Y, on and on. We had no money. We were not allowed to go into the stores because Mother explained it was wrong for us to take the time of the shopkeeper when we knew we could buy nothing. This went on for a while, I don't know how long, but I remember we sat in the park, my mother on the bench, and she finally said, "I need help." That was another thing that I learned. You go as far as you can, and then you swallow whatever pride you might have, and you ask for the help. Don't worry, you'll repay it many times over later when you can. So my mother called an agency. I don't remember what it was. Was it a church? Was it a synagogue? Was it a community? But yes, help was on the way. Evidently, there was a camp for children who were there on their way, refugees through Zurich, through Switzerland, and my 2 sisters would go there. It was in the mountains in Zurich. So my sisters went. I was left with my mother, but only one little mouth to feed, all right. The girls, my sisters, were allowed every Sunday to leave the camp, walk the hour trail down to where Mother and I were waiting. And soon Mother became suspicious. Something was wrong. What's going on at that camp? The girls were not eating anything. They had decided not to take the little food Mother had. Well, this was the touch of corruption in Zurich among even the good people. The woman there was not feeding them. She was giving them oatmeal in the morning, potatoes at night, taking the money from the agency and spending it on clothes. Of course, my mother took my sisters out. Soon thereafter, she couldn't handle it again, and she had a nervous breakdown. The ambulance came, my big sister called the agency, and now we were relocated. I was sent to a camp for little children. I didn't cry, because for the first time in many, many months, I had other little children to play with. There were toys, there was the fresh air, and the beautiful mountains that I still love today. My sisters were taken to foster parents, people who took strangers, kind people who took strangers into their home for ever how long it would be necessary on their way. And my sister Eva was taken by a family named Weibel. They are the only people that I put into my book by their real names. They were saints. Mrs. Weibel saw to my mother in the hospital. She took my sister in. She had a daughter, Erica, who I also mention in the book. Mrs. Weibel sewed clothes for all of us. Ours were threadbare. She had us at the house. I remember the first Christmas we were invited, the first Christmas I ever knew about. We kept in touch with the Weibel family for years. I visited them on my honeymoon to thank them for what they had done. Turns out they were a Catholic family. And here another lesson was taught. My mother told us, don't look at the color of people's skin. Don't ask about their faith. Ask about the kind of people they are. Are they good, moral people? And that was another lesson that I learned in the Holocaust. I have to tell you one other thing. My time's running out. There is so much to tell you of the evil, and there is even more to tell you about the kindness of strangers. My father got to America through the kindness of a stranger. Someone knew someone who lived in White Plains, New York, who was willing to sign a document that Max Wolf would not become a public charge and bring him to America. And so once he got there, he had to find the means to bring us passage. It took a year. Why? He had no resources. He too had to flee with nothing. When you flee from a dictatorship, you leave your money, you leave your business, you leave everything. My father had one thing, he had a watch, and he had our 3 pictures in his pocket. So my father went to a wholesale place, and he got a big pack of neckties, which he wore around his neck, and he became a peddler of neckties. And he went to the garment district in New York, where there were other Jews who could speak Yiddish, who could understand him. And he could show the pictures and say, Eva, Vera, Sonia, and their mother, my 3 children, my family, I have to bring them to America. One man bought 6 ties. He couldn't believe it. Why does anybody need 6 neckties? So yes, he worked. He worked as a peddler. He worked as a waiter. I have stories about that without time to get into them. He got one room where he lived, and he waited for us to come. And finally, the day arrived. We had the tickets, we got our passports, and we were on the way first through Paris on a French liner to America. I remember on that French liner the food. I remember there was baskets of fruit, and you could even bring an apple or an orange to your stateroom. I remember the voyage. I remember the terrible storm, the fourth night out, people weeping and praying, how can this be our fate, that we drown here? But no, once again, we were saved. And on the fifth day, the ship approached New York Harbor. It's very difficult for me to describe to you, after all these years, what it meant to see the Statue of Liberty. The pandemonium on that ship, the band playing God Bless America, people running down the gangplank, kissing the ground, and to know that we were free. I'm going to skip the immigration, how my father and my mother worked from the first day, all day, how we were latchkey children caring for ourselves, how they went to class and learned English, how finally when I became an adult, I took up that honor and taught English and citizenship to the foreign-speaking, how we lived in one room. My mother lived to be 96 years old, independent and fierce up until the age of 95. She refused to leave her apartment. My children and I bought her a keyboard. She called it my piano. And my mother told us, and we believed her, every morning, the first thing when she woke up, she went to her keyboard and she played this song, God Bless America.
Sonia, thank you so much for sharing your powerful story. It's clear you have so many more to tell. One question that we have for you is how often you think about these things that you just told us about, the Holocaust and your family's experience.
Not a day goes by that something does not remind me what it is to live in a free land. Things happening all over the world, you know, as well as I do. The persecution, the Rohingya people persecuted by their own, the Muslim faith, the Christians in Syria being persecuted. I belong to an organization which is an ecumenical Christian organization, Christian Solidarity, and I get their information. What is happening to the Dinka in Sudan? What is happening all over the world? And I don't have to go that far. I look at the newspapers and I see that a black young man is shot for being in the wrong neighborhood in America. And I remember what it is like to be under a dictatorship, and I make sure that before I go and vote, I know what the person stands for.
Thank you. Ms. Levitin has written 43 books and 5 plays, and her young adult novel, Journey to America, reflects some of the personal experiences she shared with us today. There are signed copies at the back of the room. Please, I encourage each of you to get one before you leave. Sonia, thank you again for sharing your story.
Thank you.